There is a special logic required to read Vico, one that sees the end retroactively revising the beginning, what in Vico's words would be the ricorso connecting to the imaginative universal, the last speech to the first speech, so to speak. Let me try to lay this out in terms of a logic of inversion and induction, but at the same time, I want to bring in the case of perception as something that involves conception from the start. After writing a book on Vico, I turned to Jacques Lacan, another crazy guy, and realized that Vico and Lacan basically had the same idea of metaphor. This was confirmed by the fact that Paul Ricoeur intentionally left both of them out of his otherwise comprehensive book about metaphor. Metaphor would seem to be about the first speech, but maybe it contains seeds of the last speech in it. This would make metaphor into a kind of induction puzzle, where the answer is given in the question. This constitutes a termination function, where metaphor creates a void. But like Vico's idea of ricorso, it's retroactive. Lacan was interested in Freud for his errors, just as Vico had been interested in the first humans because they made a mistake. This made Vico, Lacan, and Freud equally pessimistic about the human condition. They blamed thought and language for undermining the human prospects for happiness. But they saw that unhappiness began with the unique way humans saw the world in the very first moments of perception. If perception is conception, we can no longer use the mind-body divide to separate the symbolic from the imaginary. The imaginary will already have been structured by the signifier. This was Vico's insight in discovering the imaginative universal. When Lacan's son-in-law and intellectual executor Jacques-Alain Miller revealed what Lacan had told him in the 1970s about the ultimate aspiration of every human subject, it closed the circle of psychoanalysis, which began with a pile of trash, thanks to Freud's attraction to the theory of the art historian Giovanni Morelli, who had argued that the authenticity of a painting could be judged by the way the artist had styled things like fingernails and earlobes. The trash pile of visual perception led to Freud's idea of free association and Lacan's idea of a blah 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 of language he called la langue. It's one thing to say that the unconscious is connected to baby talk, but quite another to say that there is a specifically human visuality lodged inside the physiology of perception, where a trash pile is more than a trash pile. Vico would say that there is quite a bit more. The trash can not only talk, it can speak the truth, not just a truth, but a truth of truth. The British artists Tim Noble and Sue Webster give us a rather literal way to talk about this. They project a focused light beam on a carefully assembled pile of junk to make the pile cast a telltale shadow on a nearby flat wall. The profile magically contrasts with the randomness of the trash pile. In Hegelian terms, the two develop a dialectic relationship. Lacan would say that the profile is the unconscious of the trash, and that the lack of structure in the latter is what makes for the perfect structure of the former. The logic here is clearly that of the induction puzzle, where the answer is to be found in the fact of the former. So it makes a good way to talk about Vico's own induction puzzle, the imaginative universal, in relation to more than just mythic thinking. An induction puzzle gives us a false instruction. Let me give you the simplest example so we can move on. These sentences clearly have only two misspelled words, but the third error is that the sentences only have two errors. The statement is a false or faulty instruction. The fault gives us the solution. The answer is thus structural, but visually we would say that it's anamorphic. The trash pile initially claims to be nothing more than a pile of junk. The secret structure is that the artists have carefully glued things in place so that the profile will seem to reveal something hidden inside the trash, by the trash, and with the trash. The beam of light represents our first perception of the trash pile, where the pile obscures the dilated profile that is directly behind it. We have to elevate our point of view to see it, but when we do, we know immediately where the perfect shadow comes from. It was hidden by the dilation of our own cone of vision, but now we see into that cone and see the factor of dilation. The higher angle of view, what I am calling cathesis, can see into dilation as the structure of the problem. That's what Noble and Webster do to make their work of art effective. They see dilation and cathesis at the same time. That's what makes it an induction puzzle. But thanks to their particular application, we can see how the terms of dilation and cathesis can be used to talk about other induction puzzles. And there are a lot of them. When dilation and cathesis line up, we have to imagine that anything hidden lies perfectly inside the trash pile. The profile is a perfect trap. Its accidental edge is given credit for intentionally deceiving us, and the deception is linked to our being trapped inside our particular viewpoint. This was what Vico said about the paralysis of Prometheus, the rule of dilation that made the hearths of Cyclopean culture unmovable. A ruse was required to fool the ancestral spirits, the manes, that moving the altar would not change anything. Our new word, cathesis, is literally the principle embedded by the bond holding language and perception together in the thinking of the first humans that allows it to become heroic speech, the ability of Odysseus to tell lies. Vico argues for inversion functions of the imaginary. What the viewer does is imagined to come from the viewed object. The viewer's cathesis becomes the magical unconscious of the object of perception, its profile. Cathesis turns the faulty instruction of the induction puzzle sideways. Thanks to the sideways shift, the trash pile has a consciousness, an intentionality. But even more important, it has the power to conceal something, an unconscious. The elevation of the I in cathesis says that meaning is not just absent, it has been withdrawn. Our demand is now to get it back, to get past the jumble of discarded objects, the material mess, and complete a circuit. There is a rhythmic logic to this, a kind of call and response. What was taken away is automatically what needs to be restored. The lost shall be found. We lift our eyes to the mountains, as it says in Psalm 120. Here I have to reluctantly give way to Heidegger. The aletheia of truth is that it's not truth until it's been hidden. All this trash talk about the dialectic of the lost and found is getting to be more mysterious than it needs to be. Actually, the crisscross of dilation and cathesis is, simply put, just a trick. It needs to be understood on the level of a magician's sleight of hand or a writer's use of invisible symmetries. For a trick to survive, it has to be reliable, and the induction puzzle is, if anything, reliable. It has been used for thousands of years to create astonishment in everything from contests of famous artists such as Zeuxis and Parrhasius to Simonides' invention of artificial memory by means of a clever chiasmus. So it is no wonder that the artist credited with the most famous induction puzzle in Western art should give us a test case for proving the reliability of the cross of dilation and cathesis. Like the contest of Zeuxis and Parrhasius, a good trick has to be able to fool the experts. So it's no surprise that critics such as Daniel Arras still say that the meaning of Diego Velázquez's famous painting, Las Meninas, is beyond all comprehension. Maybe so, but we can at least show how this masterpiece works as an induction puzzle. Just imagine what Las Meninas would look like if it were stupid. Everything would be aligned, in balance, straightforward. We would be looking at the trash pile head on. It would not occur to us that anything lay beyond the painted two-dimensional profiles other than the real scene itself. But the real Meninas is anything but a pile of trash kind of projection. Like Noble and Webster, Velázquez has carefully glued his trash together, allowing the viewer literally to step to the side and get a zigzag cathesis view. This makes the perspectival shadow into a perfect shadow. The projection has been dragged to the side by the extra space added to the left and top, a waltz step, like the one taken by the fellow in back, who still indicates the vanishing point with his elbow, who also happens to be named Diego Velázquez. If Velázquez, the painter's little joke, it confirms that he is in on the secret of the induction puzzle. Not only does this epicentador officially have all the keys to the palace, he has all the keys to the painting, by taking a step up and to the side to hold back the curtain to the sideways view into the perspectival dilation of the painting. Induction puzzles begin with a false instruction, and Las Meninas is no exception. The mirror acts as if it had been directly in front of the king and queen the moment in 1656 when they paused to look in on the painter and their daughter and her attendants. Possibly the king and queen were having their own portrait painted, and the inverted canvas shows its other side in the mirror behind it. This is Vico's idea of having as many causes possible for any one effect, 3 inversions for the same image. The induction puzzle not only inverts cause and effect, Velázquez uses it to invert time and space. This is a 2-for-1 deal, where one small detail pulled out of place promises us a side view, but actually pulls us inside the cone of vision. Before seeing the relation of dilation to cathesis, we had no way of naming this structure. But with these terms, it becomes possible to see how Las Meninas can atomize the viewer and viewed, and stuff them inside the dilation of the frame. Not only is cathesis not cancelled by this aerosol, it is preserved. The cone of vision is filled by the 3 inversions, left to right, back to front, inside to outside. The circuit completes itself by returning to the scene of the crime, where it had been snatched by cathesis. The circuit closes in a very Vickian way. If Vico's dilation is the ideal eternal history, it is stretched apart and stuffed with both things human and things divine. If the new science is an induction puzzle, Vico's ricorso is the element of recursion that comes with cathesis, a realization of structure that sees the error of the induction puzzle, the first frame around the first human's first perception, like the mirror in Las Meninas, that is to say, shifted up and to the side. Vico, like Lacan, sees metaphor in terms of the error it makes. The first humans can't see themselves, so they mistake themselves by seeing nature as the trash pile that is their inverse subjectivity. This dilation is opened up by the cathesis, however. The wildness original to the first humans now becomes subject to domestication. Vico, borrowing from Mandeville, shows that private vices convert to public goods. And the science of divination is the institution behind this conversion. If we compare Las Meninas with Vico's justifiably famous work of visual art, we have to use logic rather than visual similarity. Every painting is a kind of inventory of what there is to see within a structured representation within the cone of vision. Vico literally shows us the way that things human are directly produced within the dilation of things divine, in the style of an iconography. But he shows us this cone of vision from the side, so we can see its logic. To make sure we know he is tying induction to inversion, Vico puts metaphysica on top of a celestial sphere, which makes the concave sky above us into a convex globe before us. But this inversion points back to a rather obscure flaw that proves Vico is constructing an induction puzzle. The inventory has left out the helmet of Hermes, and this creates a kind of lipogram, a void, that is the key to the reading of the new science. Vico has already called the divine eye providence, but there is a double meaning of being the unseen hand of the ideal eternal history and the origin of the science of divination. Divination is the flawed instruction of the first religion. An induction puzzle is what allows Vico to get away with describing pagan religion without offending the censors of the Inquisition. The flaw that distinguishes it from the true religions, Judaism and Christianity, is of course a flaw that makes all subsequent truth possible, the principle of ex falso quod libet sequitur. To make sure we get the point, Vico presents this idea in three forms. First, the imaginative universal that takes appearances to be reality. Second, the general principle of inversion, by which private vices, including paralysis, impose the first religions. And third, the way paralysis is carried forward to the dilation idea portrayed in the De Pintura. If there is dilation, there is cathesis. So to prove all three of these versions of induction, Vico removes the helmet of Hermes from his inventory, but then gives us a confirmation by doing precisely the same thing with the De Pintura's relation to the text of the new science. Verum ipsum factum. If this be true, I can put it in front of your nose. What dilation presents as a straight-line ultimatum, the absolute law of auspices, cathesis reveals to be jointed and zigzag. This zigzag is the basis of Vico's new science. By leaving the helmet of Hermes out of his detailed inventory of things divine and human, Vico invites us to think about the cosmology of this messenger of the gods, whose zigzag through the planetary spheres was a straight line held in tension by the dilation of fate. This was a journey from a birth at the outer limits of Elysium to the antipodal point of death, where the end must answer to the beginning, but where the truth of the beginning will be retroactively revealed. The divine eye at the top of things and Hermes at the bottom are, respectively, the beginning and end of the cosmos as well as the mortal individual. But for us, the other connotation is that they are the beginning and end of the new science. It is all too obvious to say that this was an image created by Rosicrucians. In this expanded cosmological view, we can appreciate Vico's story about how the dipintura itself was designed to be a literal lipogram. A lipogram creates a void that can only be filled by another void. Vico starts with the blank pages left over after his friends persuaded him to drop the idea of inserting a rebuke to Carlo Lotoli's unexpected withdrawal of support for the publication of the second edition of the New Science. He fills this void with another void. The image, he says, explains the entire project visually, which is to say, a dilation that will also be a sideways venture, a cathesis. The cut into the text will heal itself like the spear of Amfortas in Parsifal. It will invert the wound literally to prove how the subject will create a dilation, an ideal eternal history, that cathesis will cure, by providing an error that will be corrected by a new science of the signifier, the imaginative universal. The perfect shadow of human history would be preserved anamorphically, to be retrieved from the trash pile of sad defects spread across history and geography, if only we step up and to the side. Where to cut the text? It would be a combination of logic with the experience of reading the New Science, where the reader becomes a player in a zero-sum game. Vico refers to the story behind the Table of Cebes, where pilgrims passing by the Temple of Saturn see an image obscured by the shadows of the interior. Wishing to get a better view, the priest warns them that if they see the image and understand it, they will be granted eternal wisdom, but if they do not, they will be reduced to idiots. The reader becomes a genius, Vico advises in paragraph 345, if she can invert into being the writer. The induction of this inversion will suddenly turn the reader, like Walter Benjamin's Angelus Novus, with its back to history. The reader will be the one who is read. Like the inverted canvas in Las Meninas, we turn history away because history has turned us away. We can imagine constructing something, perhaps a box, where this actually happens. A mirror on one side and the inverted image of the dipintura on the opposite side creates a model of dilation, where cathesis will make the crooked straight. The viewer looks through a hole, a true hole, because it is permanently and radically empty but directive. To maintain Vico's most precious invention, the imaginative universal. This is the eye we must use to see Hermes' double nature. On one side, it is the induction puzzle created but perceived as given to the first humans, the view of the sky as a plenum of the other, which the Romans took to be Jove. On the other side, it is the universality of metaphor itself, which in my view was only fully grasped by Vico and later Jacques Lacan. But that is another story, and like all stories, it ends by returning to its beginning, a one who is a once upon a time, a tale told by an idiot with the power to signify nothing.